The bank manager asked me to come in person, said she couldn't discuss it over the phone. When I sat down across from her desk, she slid a printed statement toward me and said, "This account has been active for 41 years. I looked at the number. Then I looked at it again. My mother had told me there was nothing left. My name doesn't matter. I'm 32, a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio. I own a used truck, a modest apartment, and roughly $11,000 in student debt that I think about every time I buy name brand cereal instead of the store stuff. I am not a dramatic person. I grade papers on Friday nights. I go to bed at 10. My idea of a wild weekend is a new season of something on streaming and a frozen pizza that's actually good. My grandfather was the most steady person I have ever known. 83 years old when he passed last April. Worked the same factory floor in Dayton for 36 years, retired with a handshake and a plaque, and spent the next 2 decades gardening, arguing about baseball, and pretending he didn't secretly love his soap operas. He was my father's father. My dad died when I was 11, car accident, black ice on I-75. After that, my grandfather became something more than a grandfather. He became the person who showed up. He passed in his sleep, which everyone said was peaceful, and I think they were right. He didn't suffer. He just stopped. My mother handled everything fast. She's always been like that, efficient, organized, the kind of person who has a color-coded folder system for utility bills. Within a week of the service, she was already coordinating with a real estate agent about his house, sorting through his belongings, and making decisions about what went where. I trusted her completely. I had no reason not to. Then I found the Passbook. It was tucked inside a copy of a Louis L'Amour novel on his bedside table, slipped in like a bookmark. Small, green-covered, the old kind banks used to issue before everything went digital. His name was on the front. I almost set it aside with the donate pile. Something made me open it. The last entry was from 2009. The balance listed was just under $6,000. Not a fortune. But there was a handwritten note on the inside back cover in my grandfather's careful print. For my grandson. He'll know what this is for. I pocketed it before my mother came back into the room. Looking back, I'm not sure why I did that instinctively. Maybe something in the back of my mind was already paying attention to things I hadn't consciously registered yet. I drove back to Dayton the next day. 2 weeks later, I finally tracked down the bank. The original institution had been acquired twice over, but the account number was still in the system. That's when the branch manager asked me to come in. Said she couldn't do this over the phone. She was a woman in her late 50s, professional, careful with her words. She slid the printed statement across her desk without saying anything first. The account had not closed in 2009. It had simply stopped being updated in the Passbook. The actual balance, with 4 decades of compound interest on deposits my grandfather had made quietly and consistently for years, was not $6,000. It was substantial, enough to pay off my student loans, put a down payment on a house, and still have money left over. I stared at that number for a long time. "Has anyone else contacted you about this account?" I asked. She chose her words carefully. "I'm not able to speak to that directly. What I can tell you is that the account is in your grandfather's name. It's currently part of his estate, and the process for determining distribution would go through probate." That careful non-answer told me more than a direct answer would have. "How long ago did someone else contact you?" I said. She looked at me. Then she looked down at her desk. "You should speak with a probate attorney." I drove home with the Passbook on my passenger seat and a very specific kind of sick feeling in my stomach. Not grief. Not shock. More like when you're putting together a puzzle and you realize the piece you've been missing was in your pocket the whole time, and you just didn't check. I called my mother that evening, kept it casual, asked how the estate was progressing. Almost wrapped up, she said. There wasn't much, honestly. The house proceeds, a small checking account. I'll send you a full summary soon. What about savings accounts? Did you find anything like that? A pause. Short, but there. Nothing significant. He had a small CD that closed out years ago. Why? Did you find something? Just some old paperwork, I said. Probably nothing. Yeah, those old accounts usually close automatically if they're inactive long enough. She moved on quickly. How's work? Are your kids behaving? My grandfather had 36 years of factory wages quietly sitting in a bank account earmarked for me. My mother knew about it. She had told the bank. And she had told me there was nothing left. I lay awake that night thinking about the kind of person who looks at their dead father's last wish and makes a business decision about it. I kept coming back to one word. Why? I spent the next 2 weeks doing nothing dramatic. No confrontations, no accusations. I'm a history teacher. I know that you build your case before you make your argument. I just quietly started gathering information the way my grandfather used to garden. Methodically, patiently, and with the understanding that whatever came up was going to stay up. I hired a probate attorney. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Dayton that smelled like old carpet and coffee, and she was exactly the kind of person I needed, practical, no nonsense, and utterly unimpressed by family drama because she'd seen all of it before. I laid everything out. The passbook, the handwritten note, the bank manager's careful non-answers, the timeline of my mother's estate wrap-up. The note alone isn't a legally binding document, she said, but it establishes intent. Combined with the account history and the circumstances, you have grounds to contest the estate distribution in probate court and argue this was a specific intended gift, separate from the general estate. What does that process look like? I asked. Filing a claim, presenting evidence of your grandfather's intent, depositions possibly. It's not fast. Ohio probate can run 4 to 8 months depending on complexity and whether the other party contests. She'll contest, I said. Then budget for 8 months. I filed the claim in early June. My mother was served through her attorney, which I imagine was a fairly interesting morning for her. She called me within the hour. I cannot believe you did this. Her voice had that specific tone, not quite yelling, but in the neighborhood. I found the passbook, Mom. I found the note he wrote. That note is not a will. He didn't leave a will. That means the estate is distributed according to Ohio law, and as his surviving child, I am the legal heir. He told the bank manager about the account. He told her it was for me. You called the bank before I did. Another pause. Longer this time. I was handling the estate. That's what you do when someone dies. You contact the financial institutions. And you didn't mention it to me. I was going to give you something from the state. I was putting together a full picture first. Here's the thing about that explanation. It would have been almost convincing if she hadn't already told me the estate was nearly wrapped up with nothing significant. She'd been putting together a full picture that somehow kept coming back with me erased from it. We'll let the court sort it out, I said. That was the end of the civil portion of our relationship for a while. The first dirty trick came about 3 weeks into the process. My mother's attorney sent a letter to my attorney arguing that the passbook I'd found had been removed from the decedent's estate property without authorization, implying, without quite saying, that I'd stolen it. My attorney dismissed it in about 48 hours with a single document demonstrating that I'd been present at the estate property with full family access during the clearing process. No theft.
Nice try.
The second move was more personal. My mother reached out to my grandfather's neighbor, an older gentleman who'd been close with my grandfather for years, and apparently asked him to provide a statement suggesting my grandfather had been confused in his final years and may not have had full clarity when writing personal notes. The neighbor called me directly. "Your mother asked me to say your grandfather was losing his mind," he said, with the tone of a man who had exactly zero intention of doing that. He wasn't. He was sharp right up until about a month before the end. "I'm not signing anything." I added his contact information to my attorney's file. The third move was the one that showed me how far she was willing to go. During the discovery phase, her attorney subpoenaed my financial records, every account, going back 3 years. The argument, apparently, was that I had some kind of prior financial relationship with my grandfather that might constitute an advance on any inheritance, which would reduce my claim. My financial records are boring. I have a checking account, a small savings account, and the aforementioned student loan. The only money my grandfather ever gave me was a $50 bill every Christmas and, once, gas money when my truck broke down in 2019. Their entire subpoena produced exactly nothing, which I enjoyed more than I probably should have. What it did do was make the process longer and more expensive for both of us, which I think was partly the point, pressure me into settling for less. I didn't settle. I kept thinking about my grandfather's handwriting on that note. The careful print. The deliberate choice to set that passbook apart from everything else. He knew. He knew exactly what he was doing and who he was leaving it to. A man who worked a factory floor for 36 years doesn't make financial decisions carelessly. In September, about 3 months into the process, my attorney got access to something through discovery that neither of us had anticipated. Bank records showing correspondence. My mother had contacted the bank 4 days after my grandfather's death, before the service, before I'd even driven down, inquiring about transferring the account balance as part of estate liquidation. The bank had told her the account required probate documentation before any distribution. She hadn't mentioned it to me. She'd simply waited to see if I'd ever find out. The court date was set for late October.
I want to be honest about something.
Going into that October hearing, I wasn't feeling triumphant. I wasn't feeling righteous. I was tired and sad in a way that had nothing to do with money. Because this wasn't about the money anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about my grandfather writing my name in the back of a passbook and trusting that the person he loved most would honor it. She didn't honor it. That's the part that kept me up at night. The hearing itself was not dramatic in the way courtroom scenes look on television. It was a probate courtroom in Montgomery County, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of industrial cleaner. My attorney presented the passbook, the handwritten note, the bank correspondence timeline, the neighbor's statement, and the evidence that my mother had contacted the bank before informing me the account existed. My mother's attorney argued that without a formal will or legally executed beneficiary designation, the account was estate property subject to Ohio intestacy law, which directs assets to the surviving child, my mother, when there's no surviving spouse. My attorney's counter was clean and well-prepared. The note constituted written evidence of donative intent. The account had been physically separated from my grandfather's other documents and placed in a location specifically accessible to me. The bank contact timeline demonstrated my mother had been aware of the account and chosen not to disclose it. And the neighbor's statement confirmed my grandfather had been of sound mind and clear intention in the period before his death. The magistrate took a recess. 40 minutes. When she came back, she ruled that the combination of the written note, the physical placement of the passbook, and the surrounding evidence established sufficient donative intent under Ohio law to treat the account as a specific intended gift outside the general estate. The account was awarded to me. My mother sat very still when the ruling was read. Her attorney leaned over and said something quietly. She didn't respond to him. Outside the courthouse, she stopped me on the steps. Her attorney was behind her, visibly hoping she wouldn't say anything. "You know this isn't what he would have wanted," she said. "To have the family torn apart over money. He specifically set that money aside for me," I said. "He wrote it down," he told the neighbor. "He made it as clear as he could without a formal will. The only thing tearing the family apart is that you decided his wishes didn't matter. I raised you. After your father died, I did everything." "I know you did, and I'm not saying you didn't, but that's not the same thing as what this was." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked to her car. I stood on those courthouse steps for a few minutes just breathing. It was a cold October afternoon, the kind that feels like the air is trying to tell you something. The account transfer finalized about 6 weeks later. 41 years of compound interest on a working man's consistent deposits. My grandfather had started the account the year I was born. Not when my father died, not as an afterthought. The year I came into the world, he opened an account and started putting money in it. That detail hit me differently than everything else. And then came the part one genuinely did not see coming. While my attorney was finalizing the transfer paperwork, she reached out to me about a separate document that had surfaced through the bank's records. A letter my grandfather had written and had notarized, not filed as a will, just notarized and placed on file with the bank 6 years before he died. In it, he'd addressed my mother directly. He acknowledged that she was the person who had cared for the family, done the work, handled the hard things. He wrote that the house was hers, and he hoped it gave her stability. He wrote that the passbook account was for her grandson. My name wasn't in it, just my grandson, because he only had one, and that he was trusting her to make sure it got to him without complication. He'd told her. Directly. In writing. In a notarized letter he'd put on file 6 years ago so there would be no confusion. She'd known the entire time. Not as a discovery she made while clearing out his house. As a 6-year-old deliberate choice to disregard a direct written instruction from her own father. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my attorney's office for about 20 minutes after she told me that. Just sitting. Thinking about what it takes for a person to read a letter like that from their father, file it away in their memory, and then 4 days after he dies walk into a bank and try to roll his final wish into a general estate liquidation. I don't have a clean answer for what that is. I've thought about it a lot. The closest I can get is that some people, when they see something valuable, stop seeing the person it was meant for. The money cleared my account on a Thursday in December. I paid off my student loans the same afternoon. That sound, the balance hitting zero, is one of the better sounds I've heard in my adult life. I won't pretend otherwise. My grandfather would have made a dry comment about interest rates and then immediately changed the subject to whether the Reds had any pitching this year. I started the down payment process in January. Found a house in a neighborhood about 10 minutes from the school where I teach. Small yard, needs some work, exactly the kind of project that keeps a person sane during long winters. I told exactly 3 people the full story before putting it online. My best friend from college, a coworker who I trust completely, and my grandfather's neighbor, who had driven 40 minutes to give his statement for the hearing and refused any offer of compensation for his time. He just said, "Your grandfather was a good man, and people should keep their word." I didn't have much to add to that. My mother and I have not spoken since the courthouse steps. I'm not sure what the path back looks like, or if there is one. The issue was never the money. The issue is the notarized letter sitting in a bank file for 6 years while she smiled at me at Christmas and asked about my lesson plans. That's the part one keeps circling back to. Not the legal fight. Not the account balance. The Christmas dinners. There's a specific kind of grief in finding out that a relationship you thought was solid was actually built on a foundation that had a load-bearing lie in it. You don't lose the good memories, but you have to hold them differently. Like they still happened, but you're no longer sure you understood them correctly while they were occurring. My grandfather understood people. He wasn't naive. He had the notarized letter made because he knew, or suspected, that his wishes might not be followed without documentation. He built in the redundancy because he knew his daughter. He loved her. He still gave her the house. But he knew, and somehow he still trusted her. That's the part that gets me. He still wrote, "I'm trusting her to make sure it gets to him without complication, knowing full well it might not." Maybe that's what 41 years of quiet faith looks like. You do the right thing, you document it carefully, and you hope the people you love will choose to honor it. And if they don't, you've at least given the right person the tools to set it right. I put fresh flowers on his grave the week the transfer finalized. Stood there for a few minutes.
Didn't say anything.
Just stood there. I think he knew what he was doing every step of the way. The account opened the year I was born. The notarized letter written when he was still sharp enough to think strategically. The passbook tucked inside a novel on the nightstand, not in the filing cabinet with everything else, in a spot I'd be likely to find during a quiet moment alone. He built me a path. He just needed me to follow it. The house closes in March. It has a small patch of backyard that gets good afternoon light. I'm thinking about putting in a garden. I don't know much about gardening, but I know someone who did it for 20 years, and I still remember watching him work, methodical and patient, not rushing anything. Seems like the right place to start. Sometimes the people who love you most don't say it loudly. They just quietly make sure that when they're gone, you're going to be okay. And sometimes the most important thing you can do for them, after everything, after all of it, is make sure their effort wasn't wasted. If your family has ever looked you in the eye and told you there was nothing left, subscribe. Because clearly we need to compare notes. And apparently, I have a lot of time on my hands now that I'm not paying student loans.